At that time, they had the professor, Jimmy the plumber, Joe Bragan. They had quite a few guys in wetsuits. I would swim out to the rocks in the late afternoons, and I would get out on a rock, and at that time the fish would show up in front of me. I'd be banging fish every cast, and all the people can do was look at me. And if they came out, they were casting behind me, hitting me with plugs and all of this. But I had fish, lots of fish. And that's where I established my reputation. Because I was finding fish, I was getting out there, I was swimming every damn rock I could see. You know. And that's what the guys were, they accepted me because they saw I was very serious about fishing. And these guys were tough competition. And I had to work hard to prove to these guys that I can hold my own.
I'm very competitive with myself. I want to fish a certain way. I want to always beat myself. I try not to worry about what everybody else is doing. Obviously, if somebody else is out fishing me every night, I feel like I'm doing something wrong. But I go there trying to beat myself every night. In order to do that, I need access to some of the key spots. From my experience, there's a few places that produce consistently. If you get to those places, you're going to have it. I figured out ways to get on Weakfish Rock that Joe hadn't figured out. And I remember one night he swam out there, he's like, I can't believe you're out here already. And it's like, oh wow, I beat Joe.
Joe and I had an understanding. If he goes out early and gets the rock, you know, and I don't have to go out there right away. We had the rock. We had the rock for the rest of the night, day and night.
Weakfish Rock was a fight. Jack and I dominated that rock for a lot of years, but we had to work awfully hard at it. We had to go out earlier, and both of us really had a knack about finding the rock at high water. And a lot of the other guys wouldn't go out at high water. You know, they would wait till there was a little wash from it or something. So if they wanted it, they earned it. You know, and, I mean, one time Jack and I were on the beach getting into our wetsuits, and you know, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon for a midnight tide, and we really wanted. You know, we saw a lot of bunker that day, and I knew we were going to have a good night if we got out there. And we're putting our suits on, and a pickup truck with an open back came down the beach because you could park under almost under the light that night. And we're getting in our suits, getting ready to go out, and the tailgate opens up, and 2 guys jump out in wetsuits and swim out to the rock. And we were so pissed off, really, really mad. And if anybody waited and left the parking lot too early to go to a rock, we would be angry with them that they went down to get a rock early, you know. But yeah, there was a lot of aggressiveness, you know, back then. You just wanted there were certain rocks that just produced so many fish that you know, anybody that were on them could have caught the fish. You know, we weren't doing anything special except putting our time in and being where we wanted to be.
There was tough competition. There's only a few choice rocks. And it seems like everybody wanted that one rock, especially weak fish rock, because you can hold two guys out there.
Weak fish rock was always hard to get to. When I was in waders, one day at low tide with a flat calm water, I was able to make it with waders. But nobody really fished it until the wetsuit came along.
You'd go out in a lineup and stuff, and you know, nobody would let you in between. You had to go on the end and stuff like that. But I never had any real arguments with anybody or anything. But you know, people got fish, they keep it to themselves. You know, you have to do that, otherwise you go back the next day and you can't get into the spot. You know,
I wasn't aggressive with people. I was aggressive with trying to fish where I wanted to fish. You know, it was very important to me some nights to get to a rock, because I knew I'd have, you know, my job was, you know, tense, and my fishing wasn't. I could relax, and, you know, if I caught a couple of fish, fine. If I saw a couple of shooting stars, even better.
I used to work with Johnnies. I'd be in Johnny, and I watch and see who came into town. When somebody came into town and I know it was competition, then instead of mine going out at 7 in the evening, I would go 6. Now, if I know these guys would go out 6, I would go out at 5. You know, this is the game we played. Yeah, I had to go out before these guys, and I would stay out on a rock for 8 hours.
I just was like, what the hell is this guy doing? Even with the corkers and the big rods, I thought, you know, I fished every single night, but I didn't fish Montauk. You know, I was just starting to fish Montauk. So the first time I saw a guy in a wetsuit and with all this gear, I thought, I'm a cocky kid. I'm like, you know, 19, 18, something like that, whatever I was. And I'm like, these guys don't know what the hell they're doing. That's what I was thinking. These guys don't know what the hell they're doing.
First time I saw a guy in a wetsuit was down at Cedar Beach. There was a small table bar. You couldn't get to it in the waders. And there was one guy on it in a wetsuit, a fellow named George Jones. And then the next time I saw a wetsuit was out of Montauk, and that was Jack Freck. And that was 61, I believe. In fact, I think both times it was in 61 that I saw my first wetsuit. By about 64, 65, there were, out of Montauk, there were about 4 or 5 guys wearing wetsuits. Whitey Powalski, Georgie Jones, Jack Freck. I think there was somebody else. There was a guy that used to fish with Jack Freck once in a while, George Pavis. He wore a wetsuit, but I didn't see him too often in Montauk. And then there was a guy, Joe the Pro Rowan, who I was told wore a wetsuit, but that was it. I got my suit in 65. And for about a year or two, it was only 6 or 7 guys that were wearing wetsuits, and then all of a sudden, everybody was wearing, not everybody, but a lot of guys were wearing wetsuits. And that extended our range, because now we could swim out to rocks that you couldn't possibly get to in a wetsuit. We could get further out on North Bar and Jones Reef, and it was just a tremendous change in surf fishing in Montauk.
When you got out further, you could push out further into the moving water, and you didn't have to worry about, you know, getting wet. You got wet anyway, but you were comfortable wet, you know.
I think Jack Freck, to my knowledge, was one of the first. I hear conflicting stories that someone else was, but the first one I ever saw in a wetsuit was Jack Freck and Whitey and Willy Young and the fellas from High Hill.
The first guy I ever saw was the Professor, and he had two guys that he fished with a lot, and you know, talking about nicknames, the one guy was Richie Blue Runner, they called him, and his other buddy was Richie No Motor. Don't ask me about the No Motor, because I don't know, but they pretty much fished together. And the professor was a pretty tall man. The other two were one was you know, about halfway up the professor, and the other one was about really short guy. And if the professor stopped, boom, boom, they did one another. But yeah, the professor was the first guy I ever saw, and I watched them. That's how I learned a lot. I just watched. I would stay above the rocks, because back then, under the light, you fished the bottom rocks. You could walk at low water. You could walk in front of the lighthouse. That's why, you know, most of the incoming water was so good there. But that was really the first guy that I ever saw in a wetsuit. First guy I ever saw at the Weakfish Rock was the professor. And I looked and I saw him on the rock, and I said, boy, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. And I did it for a lot of years.
I guess that was Jack Frick. I understand it was the Sheridan brothers said that they were fished in wetsuits before him, but Jack Frick was the first guy that I ever saw. There was a Nick that came from Little Neck, all right, and he fished. He was one of the guys. He was one of the first guys I ever saw fishing the south side in the nighttime with a wetsuit. He'd go over there into Browns and into Kings, and he'd go out with a wetsuit, and he would throw more or less nothing but big Adam 40s at that back in them days.
We just heard that was the way to fish Montauk. You had to fish a wetsuit. So you know, it was really interesting the first time with the buoyancy and being pushed around and not really having your balance really well. But eventually figured it out.
I was in waders, I was casting, and I had a nice fish on. Nice. It was running, and all of the 3 guys walked out in front of me. And they cut my line. And I was pissed. Because if I could have got to my car, I would shot them. That's how pissed I was. And what I did was then that night I went back to back home, and in Freeport I went to a dive shop and bought a wetsuit, and these guys were not going to walk in front of me anymore.
I did wear a wetsuit at one time. It was I think a neoprene 3. It was a very light suit. I went over into Jones's with one of the fellas, Don, I don't know if his name was Don Baker, I'm not sure, but he was like 6'4", 6'5", and I'm in a wetsuit and he's in waders. He was out past me.
Whitey would get in the water down a North Bar or False Bar and float on the outgoing tide. He would float down along the beach, bump into a rock. He might fish there, or when he got on a reef, he'd fish there. And then he'd keep going, and I remember the first time I experienced that, Jack Frick and I were fishing under the bluff, which is between Scott's and Jones Reef. And we weren't doing anything. We were in wetsuits. And so I decided to go in and have a cigarette. And it was a pitch black night, and I could only see Jack's silhouette when the light swung around from the lighthouse. And I'm staying there smoking a cigarette, and I thought I started hearing voices, and Jack was out fairly far on the rock, and I thought, Jack's talking to the fish. So I walked down closer to the water, and then I noticed that I could see, as the light swung, I could see a bump next to Jack's rock, and it was Whitey holding on to the rock talking with him.